Welcome to another episode of K&K Real Talk. Today I have Dr. Andrew Cook with me. So excited for you to be here. Thank you, Dr. Cook. Why don't you give people a little bit of insight on what you do?
Sure. So I'm a gynecologist and a reproductive endocrinologist, which historically are the infertility subspecialty doctors, but I've been out in practice treating endometriosis for 27 and a half years now, probably 37 and a half the whole time combined. And we've treated thousands of women with endometriosis. I've focused my work on helping women with endometriosis. We're an endometriosis, and I think one of the unique things too is we've collected data and follow-up for 15 years, and I think the only center I'm aware of in the world that has done that. And so really the question is, how are people doing and what's going well, what else can we do, and just over time trying vary in the way that it presents and the degree of anatomic change that's occurred as a result of it, and then all the comorbidities and issues that are not well addressed by traditional medicine. So, and I guess, so I'm located, we have two locations, one in Northern California in Los Gatos, which is San Jose, or about an hour south of San Francisco, and then one in Durango, Colorado, which is our newer office, been here about a year.
Oh, that's awesome. Are you looking to open more offices?
Well, there's only one of me, so we're also standardizing, and the idea is, consistent quality care, and that's the most important thing. So certainly we have different ideas on how to reach more women and provide more care and more comprehensive care, but step by step.
It's definitely a process. So into the questions that we have for you today. So the first question is, what would you suggest to help manage symptoms naturally? I know lots of my followers are looking for more natural paths to things right now.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And that, so historically, it's kind of interesting going through the training and, worked with some of the previous generation of endometriosis experts, so like Dr. Robert Franklin, Dr. Robert Kelly, some of the real pioneers in the field back in the 70s and 80s. And, then getting out and looking at, surgically and, with the wide excision, I think most people are now finally starting to realize that burning or spot treatment just doesn't do it. It leaves disease behind. The whole concept of wide excision to get the endometriosis out. But, for quite a while, I mean, really over 20 years, I've been looking at the holistic integrative aspect because, somehow in Western medicine, we've gotten to the point, if you're not healthy, it's a pharmaceutical deficiency. So, and if you have a side effect of a pharmaceutical, then that's a pharmaceutical deficiency. In other words, oh, you had a side effect, let's give you another medication to help with that. And to me, it's crazy. I mean, we're never going to get healthy managing disease. So, and, there's endometriosis, there's a lot of overlap with things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, and, the list goes on. And none of that is really addressed with Western medicine. So then, my background, I was brought up with a bunch of engineers and physicists, and, we're problem solving. Okay, if we don't have the answer, how do we look at it? How do we figure it out? And started going to all these integrative conferences back in the 90s. And I remember at the time people would be, wait a minute, you're a surgeon, what are you doing here? like, well, I'm looking for answers. And back then, there was less science. I think we're certainly making progress. And so I'm very much of an advocate of health and wellness. And, I mean, I've have insulin resistance, and, I've learned how critical, our environment, our dietary changes, and our, just mental state of mind affect everything. And, what we really want is to be healthy, and, as endo patients, to not be worrying about the pain or have it interfere with what we can do or quality of life. And so as far as, and, I think that that it takes different treatment modalities to gain the best success. So if you had a carpenter show up to put an addition on your house, and they opened their toolbox and all they had was a hammer, probably not a good sign. You need screwdrivers and tape measures and all the things. And in medicine, in a lot of ways, it's the same way to me. So there's no one thing that has all the answers. And, with surgery, it's the wide excision. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like cancer. It's not a cancer, but there's a lot of similarities. So if you go in and you have cancer surgery and you sit down and you don't do anything and you eat Twinkies all day, probably not the best approach. But like Steve Jobs had cancer, and he did all the good, healthy stuff, but he neglected, and I know one of the surgeons that was involved with this case, and it was very treatable. If they just would have got that tumor out and he did these things, then he would still be here today. So, so as far as I don't see it as either or, okay, as far as integrative or getting the disease out, and ideally both. Now, as far as the basics, the whole idea is we want to have everything functioning as good as possible. And I see a lot of insulin resistance. I see we have a way of checking people's oxidative stress. And I see, a lot of really unhealthy people. And as I've said, with surgery, I can remove disease, but I cannot create health and wellness. So to get healthy, we need to do this. And the basics, like we wrote the book, I think the Endometriosis Diet and Lifestyle Guide. And it was really written for people that are motivated and want to try to do what they can to get healthy, and to be as a freestanding guide. Because, the other thing is endometriosis is devastating to people's ability to get out and work, and then, the medical bills pile up. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. So I tried to make this book for somebody that could get it and really use it on their own. And it has all the most recent scientific information, and it's written with the kind of the question, okay, if I'm willing to do everything, what can I do? And we wrote that book. And quite frankly, I think the average person, they're not going to be able to do everything either. So realistically, part of it is, okay, well, for me, what's a good step? What's sustainable? But it comes down, a lot of it is the food we're exposed is really not good food. So one good step is good nutrient dense, leafy green, vegetables. And it's the phytochemicals are what put color in everything. And so often we're talking about, is it carbohydrates or proteins or fats, and does it have this vitamin or that nutrient? We're really missing the boat, because most of what's nutrition is not in the basic processed foods. And like my son once said, Dad, what's a processed food? I said, if it's in a box, it's processed. If it looks like it came out of the ground, it's not. And but that can be really challenging. You feel horrible and all I can do is have a soda cracker. Well, that's just the state that some people are in. But if we can start to eke in these good nutrient dense foods, all the processed stuff, it creates inflammation. inflammation creates the situation where it makes it fertile for endo to grow and for other conditions to happen. So it's really hard. You know, I have a picture I showed some people of me 8 years ago, and they're like, "Oh my God, are you the same person?" I said, "Yeah, it was challenging. I mean, it's a battle to try to eat good because, I mean, let's be honest, I like McDonald's. I like it. Okay, I confess. Now, it's been years since I ate it, and I used to eat it all the time. But the difference, it's actually crazy. It's hard to believe how much difference it makes. So one is, you know, what are we exposed to? You know, toxins and the environment, and the food is the most common thing. So, and everybody's heard about it, and it's just a challenge. It's one of the most challenging things we'll do in life if you're really trying to eat healthy, because it's all around us, and there's a lot of unhealthy food, and a lot of, you know, you go out with people. What do? You get together and you eat. You do for different things. So it's a challenge, but that's one big thing. The other thing that I would say is really helpful is it's just it's what is the story? What are you looking at for your future? And that gets a little bit complex, but it's easy to, you know, if you got somebody pointing a gun at your head, which is kind of like endo. Okay, I'm feeling okay today, but maybe tomorrow I'm not going to. Maybe I will. Maybe it'll be the next day. But we know that there's certain days of the month that you're going to be out of commission. And then if you said, well, okay, I'm going to go meet my friend and do something, but that day it's bad. And then you're like, okay, I guess I'm going to have to flake again because I just can't do it. You know, it's like you have one bullet in the barrel, and it's like, okay, well, you know, 7 of the 8 barrels don't have anything into it, so don't worry about it and focus on what you want to do. But it's like it's always there trying to say, well, yeah, but you know this thing's coming down the road. So it just tends to drag people into the negative worry mode. And as much as we can get them to know this is this is the future I want to create. And it's just, you know, again, when I see people after surgery, it's like, okay, we're going to have the next month to heal physically, but then you're probably going to have a grieving process because you've been in survival mode. And if you're feeling better now, you've had a lot of loss, but you've never processed that. So if you find yourself angry, upset, or, you know, or depressed, it's like, well, yeah, anybody would be, you know, that's gone through this. And this is part of the grieving. So the healing process is more than just physical. You know, it's emotional, it's spiritual, it's on many levels. And so what can we do naturally? I mean, make sure you don't, you know, have a lot of environmental toxins that you're exposed to. You know, the plastic water bottles, if it's been in the car getting overheated, you know, you probably have a lot of BPA you're drinking. So, you know, being smart about things. And at the same time, it can drive you crazy, you know, because it's like, wait a minute, I ate this, you know, so now is my endo back because I was weak for a minute and I had such and such, you know. So it's not getting too carried away with everything, just saying, you know, I'm going to be realistic with where I am right now in life and what are some steps I could take, you know, and I'm going to do the best I can, knowing, okay, it's not perfect, but if I did this today, it's better than not doing it today. So just, I don't know, a few basics.
I totally agree. It's a full approach. You have to think about your whole body, your whole person when dealing with endo, because it really does affect your whole life.
Yeah, it truly does. So a few basics.
So,
And again, I think the book is a good resource. It's a little dry. It's not the easiest read, but, you know, it's really trying to get some honest, accurate, scientifically based information out there. And there's not enough of that when it comes to endometriosis.
there's definitely not enough valuable, correct information out there. There's so much more misinformation than there is correct information.
Unfortunately, that is true.
So what could be done to improve someone's fertility?
Well, a couple things. One is, again, probably 60% of women with endo do not have problems getting pregnant. 40% do. We do have what's called the Endometriosis Fertility Index, originally published by Dr. Adamson, I think in 2010. It's a scientifically based, it's a kind of staging system. It's a 0 to 10, with 10 being the best. It predicts the chance of pregnancy following good excision endometriosis surgery over the next 3 years. And so if you have somebody with normal tubes and ovaries, everything else is okay, they have good egg quality and stuff, it goes from 0 to 75% of patients on their own with no fertility help getting pregnant. So that's one. The second thing I see a lot of is insulin resistance, and that's hugely underdiagnosed. Insulin controls blood sugar. It's kind of a pre-diabetic or anybody with a history of baby born over 8 pounds, or any parent or relative with diabetes, especially type 2, they probably have insulin resistance. The reproductively, what happens, it makes the eggs resistant to fertilization and growth. And so, especially somebody with irregular periods, they probably have insulin resistance, craving of sweets, probably insulin resistance. If they have a high triglyceride and a low good cholesterol, HDL, insulin resistance. Again, if they've been told they have polycystic ovarian syndrome, insulin resistance. So there's a huge number of people out there with undiagnosed insulin resistance, and that creates a fertility problem in itself. So same thing, I mean, it comes back to processed food, especially. So again, I have insulin resistance. I resisted for years making changes, and I finally had to realize, all right, rule number one is it's not fair, okay? What somebody else can do, I can't do. That's not fair. Why can't it? It's not fair. And rule number two, if you're a woman, it's doubly not fair, because you know a guy can get away with half the stuff, I mean, you can't even think about. So again, it's been proven scientifically. So, and like myself, I had to go on like a vegetable juice diet for a year because I was so addicted to junk food. And finally got far enough away. And then as you start to get healthier, your insulin works better, and you don't have to be quite so fanatical. But so for fertility, again, it does apply and it does make a difference. And in my case, I was getting on all these pharmaceuticals and still had labs that were out. And once I made all the changes, I was floored. I'm off all those pharmaceuticals now. My labs are normal. It's crazy. I never would have believed it. And I've been in the health field for all these years. So that's probably if you can afford to get true, good, wide excision treatment surgery, that's definitely going to help. And then the good nutrient-dense foods that people with insulin resistance really, really need to be pursuing.
I think that's great advice. I
Not
didn't
easy
know.
advice. You can't have somebody else tell you what to do. You have to be in the driver's seat. Because the minute somebody says, what are you doing? I mean, all bets are off. You have to be in control. It's so challenging to do it all.
And yeah, I've definitely found that with making my own health changes. It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, it is.
So why do you think that patients are having so many surgeries?
Yeah, it's a good question. In my patient population, on average, my first surgery for people is their fourth or fifth surgery. And with that, the reoperation rate's only about 17%. So either I'm really lucky in my timing or we're doing something different. And what I see is a couple things. And that's actually a good question, and is probably, we could talk for a long time about it. I think the basics are this. Number one, the steps that are needed to do a proper diagnostic laparoscope. We're not talking about treating anything. We're just, how do you do the basic steps to make sure that you see all the endo? From what I see, most all the time, that's not being done. So if you didn't do it correctly and you didn't see it, one, you're never going to know it's there to take it out. Okay. Two, if you did a proper diagnostic scope, then there's two basic reasons why it's not being done properly. One is most docs are still doing coagulation surgery, and that just, it's outdated, it's not effective, but the problem is the professors at the medical schools are still teaching it. So that's all that the docs know. They can be great surgeons, great people, but if all they've ever been told is the truth, is not, then we got an uphill battle. Two, it takes 10 or 15 minutes to do coagulation surgery. It can take an hour to 10 hours to do a good excision surgery. Insurance doesn't pay for it. Most of the reimbursements are less than what it costs to provide the service. So it's definitely gender biased. They've done studies looking at comparable surgeries for women and for men, and the reimbursements for women's surgery is dramatically less than men. We won't get too far down that road, but that's well known. And then there's two basic types of endo. Stage 1 and 2, it's non-invasive. It's on the surface, it's not destroying tissue, it's not eating away. But it's like you dropped a pepper shaker on the floor in the kitchen, and you got little clumps here, and it's all over the place. It's not in the living room, but it's all over the kitchen. So you have to get around it and really sweep it all up. So unless you're getting around all the endo, and I use the analogy of a mole. If you had a mole and you thought, that's looking a little funky, I wonder if that's turning into a melanoma, and you went to the doctor and you said, Doc, what do you think? Is it okay? And they said, no, I think we better get that thing off. We know they would just burn the top of it or cut right around the pigmented part. They're going to take a little border of normal skin. Because if it does come back melanoma, we all know the next question is, did you get it all? Because if you didn't, we know that with melanoma, it's going to keep growing and I'm going to die. We got to get it. Well, endometriosis isn't going to kill you, but it can rob you of your any functional life. So you better make sure to get it all. And the technique to do that is not taught to doctors in their training. So unless they've gotten some kind of training afterwards or had some kind of interest, it's not going to happen. And that's the easy stuff. Now you get the invasive surgery. That can be some of the most difficult surgery known to man, period. I have a gynecologic oncologist, a cancer doctor, and there's once in a while we'll work together, and he said, Andy, 2 of my 5 worst cases are yours. And so the technical ability in those gets really challenging. And unless you do it all the time, like anything else, you're not going to become good at it. Like you get in an airplane, you buckle your seatbelt, you take off, you land, it's all cool. It's a good pilot. He's paid for it. He's professional. If you went out into a stunt airplane and he'd never done it before, you may not want to get in that plane. Now, over time, he could learn how to do the loop-de-doops and fly upside down without hitting the ground and all that stuff. But you need a lot of practice to get that. And there's not a lot of people that, one, want to do it, choose to do it, or have the natural ability to do it with all that education. In a lot of ways, those invasive cases of endo, it's the real deal. I mean, it's serious stuff. It's not a cancer, but it acts like a cancer locally. So what happens? Surgeons are not accountable. There's often no objective information, meaning did you videotape it? Did you take pictures? No, I told you what I saw, and I told you what I did. That's what you think you saw and what you think you did. But let me have independent verification. No, I might get sued if I do that. It's craziness. So, it's all those things combining together where the doctor, they may think they get it all, but they didn't really. And so ultimately, why do people have so many surgeries? Because if you only take it half out, it's going to come back. If you tell your kid, go weed the garden, and all they do is rip the tops off the weeds and leave all the roots, you say, why do I have to weed it every week? It just keeps coming back. Well, if we dig it up and get rid of all the roots, then we're good to go until something blows in there, something else.
So that leading into my next question, what would be the best way to find a specialist, and why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important because, I mean, anybody dealing with endo, I mean, yeah, there's some cases easy, you just treat them and that's it, and they're all the way better. But there's a lot of other co-conditions, you know, health conditions. And so it's complex, you know, I mean, that's why we have specialists. When you have a disease or an area that is complex, you need to know a lot of things about that one area. So you know a lot about that one area, but not anything, you know, I don't know how to do heart surgery, you know, or those kind of things. The problem is there's not too many specialists out there, and there's no official specialty, you know. So if you have a high-risk pregnancy, you go to the high-risk pregnancy doctor. You know, if you have heart disease, you go to a cardiologist, and there's no endo specialty that's official. There are people out there that have dedicated their life to it, and they're really working hard to do the right thing. And unfortunately, there are few and far between, and I'm not sure they're retiring faster than they're coming on board. So, you know, the forums like what you have, you know, word of mouth, you know, if somebody's doing this all the time, then they're more likely to be good at it. If they're delivering babies and doing everything else, it's hard. You know, I don't care how good you are. It's just difficult. So you have to do it all the time. So I think the forums, the word of mouth, you know, asking if, you know, I mean, basically if they have a general practice versus only doing this. And then, you know, the idea of wide excision, you know, recently I've seen that the excision's a buzzword. Okay, so you ask the doctor, do you excise? And I'm seeing now on the operative reports what I call micro excision. So they take a little piece and they send it, and then they burn the rest of it because they know that people want them to excise. So that it's excision and coagulation. And so one thing is I look at how big of a specimen did they take at surgery. If the pathology is a 2 millimeter by 3 millimeter by 4 millimeter, realizing 25 millimeters is an inch, they take a little speck of tissue, and so it needs to be bigger. But at this point, it's challenging. There's no organized specialty. There's no reporting system like for IVF. The results you can go find online. There's no reporting agency. So it's a challenge. I think word of mouth, talking, that kind of stuff.
Why do you think there's so little research being done?
Well, there's not much funding for it. You know, you got to get funding to pay for it. And, you know, I think we still have a bit of a validation problem. It's getting there. You know, most of the research money is big pharma, you know, and the basic approach with pharmaceuticals is estrogen suppression, which is really crude. It's never been shown. I don't know of one single case that's been documented to get rid of endometriosis. It may help with the symptoms temporarily. Anyway, funding.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So what made you want to specialize in endometriosis?
It's kind of, I think it found me rather than me finding it, really. You know, I was going through medical school, and ironically, when I was a teenager, I was squeamish and didn't like the sight of blood. And so it was a little nerve-wracking going to medical school thinking, how am I going to do? But when I got there, it was, again, Western medicine is a lot of disease management, giving drugs out. Or surgery, for the better or worse, I mean, you could actually fix stuff. And then I was trying to figure out, I did where Michael DeBakey, Denton Cooley, all the big heart surgeons. It was an amazing, amazing surgery program, but they didn't have a life. I wanted some balance. I almost did ear, nose, throat surgery, but then fortunately I spent some time with Dr. Robert Franklin, who just, it was the grandfather of endo. I mean, he was doing endo way before anybody else. And at the time, had a big practice in Texas. And he was just a really nice gentleman. And he really cared about his patients. And he was an amazing surgeon. And I just, watching him for these women with endo, I mean, it's amazing. And so it was because of him. And from that, that's when I decided to do endo. From there,
So what are you currently working on, or what do you hope to see in the future of endo treatment or diagnosis?
yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have a blood test or something that really was very predictive. If you stop and talk to people, it's actually really accurate. Listening to women, if you just listen, which I think that would be step one in becoming an endo specialist, is listen. Your patients are going to tell you a lot. They know what they're talking about. And I think, at some point to get a better training program, documentation of what's going on in surgery. And then I think, step one has been endometriosis awareness, of how devastating this disease is. And I think one thing we're working on is step two, which is there is life after endo, and it cannot be just a surviving life. It can be an amazing life that, is just phenomenal. And so we've got some programs that we'll be announcing shortly that will be available online. And I think it's going to be so empowering to women. And I'm very, very excited about it.
That's awesome. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk again.
Well, thank you so much for being on. And if you guys have more questions for Dr. Cook, or you'd like to see him on the podcast again, leave some questions below and we can connect with Dr. Cook again. Thank you so much for being on.
That's great, Chris. Thanks. It's been super fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Kristen.